Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shoumo Datta, and I am a research intern at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. On behalf of the Institute of Chinese Studies, I extend a warm welcome to all to today's ICS Wednesday seminar titled Understanding South Korea's Declining Fertility Rates, a Critical Consciousness Framework. Today's discussion examines South Korea's demographic decline, which is one of the lowest globally. And with a current population of 51.8 million, the country is projected to shrink to 36.2 million by 2072. Korean society has already begun to experience the effects, including a shrinking workforce, school closures, business shutdowns, and many more. Rather than treating education, financial pressures, career development, and gender inequality as a list of discrete causes, the speaker in today's discussion analyzes them cumulatively through Paulo Freire's concept of critical consciousness. It traces through three stages how education and lived experience give women awareness of structural inequalities, how that awareness develops into agency, and how agency translates into critical action, individual or collective, as in the 4B movement. The speaker for today's seminar is Ms. Torunika Roy. She is a research associate at the Council for Strategic and Defense Research, CSDR, in New Delhi. She holds a BA degree in International Studies, specializing in East Asian Studies and International Law and Diplomacy from Ewha Women's University, Seoul, an MA in International Relations and Area Studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and has submitted her PhD in Korean Studies in JNU's Center for East Asian Studies. Her research focuses on East Asian politics, security, and socio-political transformations, with particular expertise on the Korean Peninsula, India-Korea relations, and Indo-Pacific strategic affairs. Her work has been published in leading outlets, including the Indian Express, Frontline, Hindustan Times, The Print, and Global Asia. The chair for today's seminar is Professor Govind Kelkar. She is an executive director of GenDev, Center for Research and Innovation, and was previously a senior advisor at Landesa, Seattle, USA. She has a PhD in political economy of China and is a visiting professor at the Council for Social Development and the Institute for Human Development, New Delhi, as well as a distinguished adjunct faculty at the Asian Institute of Technology in Bangkok, Thailand, and an honorary professor at the Institute of Ethnology of the Yunnan Academy of Social Sciences in China. She has authored 16 books and numerous scholarly publications, including her recent book titled Witch Hunts, Culture, Patriarchy, and Structural Transformation, and a compendium titled Gender, Culture and Capital, Witch Hunts, and Ritual Attacks Across Northeast India. Before I hand over to the chair, I would like to request all participants to follow a few housekeeping rules. All participants shall remain muted during the seminar. Questions may be posted in the chat box along with your name and affiliation. Alternatively, you may use the raise hand option during the interactive session. You will then be invited to unmute yourself and ask a question. I now hand over to the chair. Over to you, Professor Govind Kelkar. Thank you.
Professor, I think you need to unmute yourself. We can't hear.
Okay.
Thank you.
Greetings to everybody. I repeat, I have been introduced, but my name is Govind Kelkar. We have come together to listen to our eminent scholar, Tonika Roy from CSDR. And she, as you heard about her introduction, she has written widely on this in terms of the newspapers and articles, so widely published subject. Why this subject is important? Because China, Japan, all East Asian societies are, and increasing India also, we are facing the fertility crisis. And fertility crisis means that there is likely to be strong pressure on women to produce children, and that will hamper and their progress. That is another thing. So that is not really, we have to think as young and not so young scholars, everybody, and activists. Interestingly, two things has impressed me very much about Korea. I recently wrote something on the soft power of Korea. One has been really the critical consciousness of women and how it can affect the development process. So it is not on kind of thing that is to be taken simply, but it is very much linked to the development process. And the second is about the major factor that how the social media, which is increasingly now getting important in India also, how it can play a major role in turning the opinion and creating a critical consciousness of women as well as of men. But this also has resulted in a backlash about on women's empowerment or women's movement, whatever, or feminist studies in particular. So that's why the Tonika Roy's work is extremely important, and we should pay extremely an important attention to her. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor, and also ICS for having me here. I used to be part of ICS few years ago, and I'm honored to be here today as a speaker. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Torunika, and although my introduction is there, but I just wanted to repeat briefly that I work as a research associate at Council for Security and Defense Research for its project that's called Korea Chair Project, which is held by Professor Raja Mohan. And I recently submitted my PhD, and today's presentation is very closely related to this topic only. And it's titled Understanding South Korea's Declining Fertility Rate, a Critical Consciousness Framework. So, South Korea, as Professor also mentioned, has attracted global attention because it has become one of the lowest fertility country having one of the lowest fertility rates in the world. And while economists and demographers have extensively studied this issue, my research asks a little bit different kind of question. Rather than just asking only why women are not producing children and why are they not interested in motherhood, I try to frame it as how has women's growing awareness of structural inequality shaped their reproductive choices, especially in South Korea. And to answer this, I use Paulo Freire's concept of critical consciousness, which allows us to understand fertility not simply just as an economic outcome, but also as a social and political decision. Next slide, please.
You want to continue, Tonika? Seems to be
Actually, I
some...
wanted to show the next slide, so just waiting for the... Yeah, thank you so much. So let me just begin with the current situation. Sorry, I couldn't find an English graph. So this is a graph in Korean, and it just illustrates South Korea's fertility trajectory over the past decade. As you can see here in the downside, in 2015, the total fertility rate stood at 1.24 children per woman, and then it declined almost every year. Since 2015, it's a continuous decline till 2025. And although there was a slight recovery to 0.80 in 2025, the fertility rate remains far below the replacement level of 2.1 children per woman. Therefore, while the recent increase is encouraging and it's pretty much optimistic for a lot of people who are following this trend, it does not indicate that South Korea's demographic crisis has been resolved. Just to briefly explain the increase, it's because post-COVID there is a rise in marriages, and there are more births among women in their early 30s now. Some women are also considering to have a second child as the sibling for the first one. And of course, there is a huge government support through incentives and subsidies. So now, what exactly is total fertility rate? It refers to the average number of children a woman is expected to have over her reproductive lifetime, assuming current fertility patterns remain constant. And to maintain a stable population without any immigration, developed countries generally require a fertility rate of around 2.1 children per woman, known as replacement level. And South Korea's fertility rate is therefore less than half of what is needed to simply replace its existing population. And right now, it's about 51.8 million. Also, while many OECD countries have experienced declining fertility, South Korea's case is pretty unique, and it's a complete outlier First, it's a super aged society, which it became in 2024, which means that about 20% of the population is above 65 years old. And the rate of declining fertility rate is in South Korea is very speedy as well. So according to this demographer called Dudley Poston, he mentioned that while it took USA about 170 years to decline its or to come up with the declining fertility rate below replacement level, for South Korea it was only about 60 years. So the speed is very astonishing. And then it's not simply just below the OECD average, it's dramatically below it. And many scholars also mentioned that South Korea is in a low fertility trap, which means it's below the replacement level is below 1.5. It's quite difficult to bring it back to stable the population. So now let me briefly mention this survey by Aging Society and Population Policy, which took place in March 2026. Among unmarried adults without children, around 51% of men still say that they want children. However, for women, it's only 31%. So there's a clear gender gap in this scenario, and it suggests that declining fertility is no longer simply an economic issue. Instead, women and men increasingly have different expectations about marriage, parenthood, and gender roles. And the consequences are significantly visible in Korea as well, as Professor was also mentioning. The economic issue has begun to show its repercussions. Schools are shutting down because there are not enough children, especially in rural areas. Kindergartens have been turned into elderly caregiver centers. Some rural areas are also considering immigration to offset population decline, and these have their other kinds of repercussions also. Then the military recruitment is becoming increasingly difficult. Industries that once sold baby products are shifting towards products for elderly consumers. And finally, the government has spent billions of dollars on cash incentives and family support policies, yet the fertility has remained stubbornly low. So that means the financial incentives alone cannot fully explain the issue. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this brings me to a research gap. So existing literature identifies many important factors, such as some scholars focus on education, others focus on employment, housing cost, childcare expenses, or delayed marriage. And all of these explanations are valuable and important to understand the phenomena of declining fertility rates. However, most studies examine the factors separately, and very few studies provide an integrated framework showing how these different factors interact, especially in South Korea's case. And even fewer studies explicitly connect gender inequality with fertility decline. Therefore, my objective is not to reject the previous explanations. Instead, I'm trying to propose organizing these different factors through the framework of Paulo Freire's critical consciousness to understand the declining fertility in South Korea. And this will allow us to understand that this is a process rather than just a single event. Next slide, please. So coming to the framework, critical consciousness, it was proposed by this Brazilian scholar named Paulo Freire. He was a Brazilian educator and philosopher, and he's best known for this book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And in that book, he wrote that experiencing poverty helped him understand how social structures, not just individual failures, shape people's lives. And he argued that people are not simply passive recipients of society. Instead, they gradually become aware of structural inequalities surrounding them. And he called this process critical consciousness. According to Freire, this consciousness develops in three stages. First is critical analysis, or we can call it as awareness. Individuals begin recognizing that many of the difficulties they experience are not personal failures, but products of larger social structures. So for Korean women, this includes recognizing workplace discrimination, unequal domestic labor, high housing costs, high cost of living, and rigid expectations surrounding motherhood. The second is agency. So it's very simple. Like once people recognize these structures, they develop agency, they develop confidence, and the capacity to make independent decisions. Women become more confident in deciding what kind of life they want. They have education, they have financial independence and professional experience to further strengthen this kind of agency. Third is critical action, where awareness translates into behavior. This does not necessarily mean joining political protests. However, in Korea, a lot of protests do take place, and critical action can simply mean making different life choices. In South Korea, this often appears as delayed marriage, choosing not to marry, or postponing childbirth, or deciding not to have children at all. And so, my argument follows that the development of critical consciousness or awareness through these stages among women contributes to lower fertility. I also argue that the process is quite stronger among women with higher level of education because education expands awareness and opportunities. Next slide, please. Yeah. So, developing awareness. So, where does this awareness come from? South Korea experienced one of the fastest economic transformations in modern history, and within just a few decades, it moved from a poor agricultural society to one of the world's largest economy. Economically, this is often known as a miracle on the Han River. However, there's a problem. The social institutions did not modernize at the same speed. There were traditional expectations regarding gender that still remain deeply embedded in the modern society as well. And one important influence here is Confucianism, which is an ethical and philosophical tradition originating in China over 2500 years ago. And it just tells how to follow one's life through rules or do's and do nots, and it emphasizes on hierarchy, family duty, respect for elders, and social harmony. Historically, women were expected to prioritize family responsibilities over personal ambitions. And there were some concepts such as three obediences. In Korean, it's known as Samchung Chido, which illustrates that women has to obey. Like there are three principles that women has to follow. For example, the woman is expected to obey her father before marriage, her husband before marriage, after marriage, and her son after husband's death. And these norms are still reinforced by male authority within the family in Korea. There are some other there are some other concepts such as yin and yang, which are many scholars argue that they are misinterpreted, but still yang is associated with men, leadership, public life, politics, and authority, whereas yin is associated with domestic responsibilities, obedience, caregiving, and private sphere. And in order to run a society, both needs to be there in a balanced way, but in a lot of literature, it's interpreted in a way that yin has to be subjugated under yang. And there are other four virtues which is expected from women, such as loyalty, proper speech, proper appearance, diligence. Although contemporary Korea has modernized enormously, many of these expectations continue to shape their life. And this creates tension between modern education and traditional family norms. Next slide. So, talking about education and structural inequality, South Korean women today are among the most highly educated among the OECD countries. Around 77% complete tertiary education compared to approximately 63% of men, and it helps them expanding their opportunities and aspirations through exposure. However, as I mentioned in my previous slide, higher education has not produced equal treatment. Women continue facing persistent structural inequalities. And during South Korea's authoritarian developmental period, rapid industrialization relied heavily on women's labor. And at that time, these women were known as industrial soldiers, and they had to work in these factories for long hours, and they were highly underpaid. Many women worked in factories under difficult conditions while remaining responsible for household duties at the same time. And the state also exercised significant control over women's reproductive decisions through population control policies, because at that time, Korea's fertility rate was around 6. And that was quite high for the society, and the government thought that if in order to pursue economic development, it was necessary to decrease the number of people living in Korea. And as a result, today's younger women, through education, recognize these historical patterns. Education enables them to critically evaluate why these inequalities persist. And in other words, education becomes a catalyst for critical awareness. Next slide, please. There are some structural factors contributing to declining fertility. First, which I mentioned, education, it increases career opportunities. And there are some theories such as economic theory by Gary Becker. He proposed that women with higher education face greater opportunity cost from interrupting careers for childbirth. And second is second demographic transition, which argues that modern societies increasingly prioritize self-realization and individual choice. And marriage and motherhood therefore become optional rather than obligatory. And third is also double burden. Even when women participate equally in paid employment, they continue performing most unpaid domestic work. And in Korea, there is a report by Korea Institute of Health and Social Affairs called KIHASA. It said that women spend around 129 minutes per day on housework compared to only about 17 minutes for men. And it got worse during the COVID. Another important issue is long working hours. Korea continues to record some of the longest working hours in the OECD, and the long work schedules leave very little time for family life. Next slide. Yeah. Gender inequality also persists in workplaces. So one of them is gender wage gap. South Korea recorded the largest gender wage gap among OECD countries, despite having one of the most educated women population. And it hovered around 30 to 35% for over 2 decades. In 2022, women only earn only 65% of men's wages. Next slide. And in this slide, I am going to talk about the motherhood penalty that a lot of women feel in South Korea. So women face wage gaps, promotion barriers, career interruptions after childbirth, and discrimination against mothers. This produces what is called M-shaped employment curve. Women's employment drops sharply during the childbearing years before increasingly later in life. So in this graph, you can see that there is a dip. It's because they are quitting their jobs, or they're forced to quit their jobs, or they're not getting promotion because they have taken the leaves to take care of their children at house. And this demonstrates how motherhood still interrupts career. Taken together, these structural conditions increase the cost, both financial and personal, of having children. Next slide. So, to understand whether women themselves recognize these structural issues, I conducted my survey. While doing my PhD, I went to Korea for about 6 months, and I was able to talk to women, interview them, and also run some surveys. And the results show that many respondents describe feeling anxious, frustrated, and pressured after marriage. So in this graph, you can see one of the question is, do you feel societal expectations pressure women more than men regarding family and children? And most of them, about 82.9%, said yes. Another one is, which of the following factors do you feel most aware of? And number one is double burden, then high cost of child rearing, then expectation around marriage, then gender inequality in workplace, and then social stigma against single or childless women. Next slide. There are some more questions such as, have you ever faced workplace discrimination due to your gender or marital status? And again, most of them are saying yes, frequently and sometimes. If yes, then what type of discrimination have you faced? Number one is lack of promotions or leadership, then harassment at workplace, unequal pay, and then pressure to leave work after marriage or having children. The result shows that many respondents describe feeling anxious, frustrated, and pressured after marriage. Many also identified workplace discrimination and unequal household responsibilities. These responses suggest that women are not simply experiencing inequality, they're also actively recognizes what's wrong around them and interpreting these inequalities. And this corresponds closely to Freire's first stage of critical analysis or awareness. Next slide. So talking about the second stage, it's agency, and I also again run some surveys to understand how they are discovering their agency. So the first is, do you believe women should have the right to prioritize their careers over traditional roles? And as you can see here, most of them strongly agreed to this. And on the scale of 1 to 5, how confident do you feel making decisions about your life independent of social expectations? And most of them were pretty confident, as you can see in number 4 and number 5. And another next slide, please. So these women, they wish to make independent decisions regarding careers, finance, and relationships and parenthood. And one important historical influence is the 1997 Asian financial crisis. At that time, many families experienced severe economic hardships. And this convinced many young women that financial independence is extremely necessary before considering marriage. Another concept is the defamiliation, which was used as the author Chang in 2010 as a protective strategy. This refers to reducing dependence on traditional family institutions. Instead of assuming marriage is necessary, many women increasingly seek independence through education, employment, and personal choice. As agency increases, marriage is delayed, fertility intentions decline, and childbirth becomes less common. As you can see in this graph, many women choose to not have a family in order to escape that M curve chasm that I expressed in my previous slide. Next slide. So now talking about action, this is the final stage of the critical consciousness framework. And just I'm going to read the responses here again. So for the first is, have you ever made a personal decision that went against societal norms? And as you can see, most of them are saying yes. Or and the other one is, with what actions if you have taken to address inequality and societal pressures? And this can come as individualistic, collective, and deliberative. So the answers depend on them. So first is open discussions with family. Second is personal decisions like delaying marriage. And the third one is advocacy and joining movements that I'm going to talk next in the next slide. Yeah. So another question was about, do you support movements like 4B or no marriage movement? While most of them said yes, no to this answer question, but there were few that said yes also. And have you ever participated in initiatives or discussions related to gender equality, societal expectations, or family planning? And the answers were, they also had yes as a proportion of the answer. So coming to this part, I am pretty sure that a lot of people have heard about South Korea's 4B movement, and the B in 4B is actually this Korean word, which is P. P means to avoid or to say no. So this 4B this 4B movement, they are saying no to marriage, no to childbirth, no to dating, and no to heterosexual relationships. And it is important to emphasize that 4B represents only a relatively small group of women, as you can see in this survey as well. However, it has become symbolically influential in South Korea. More broadly, it reflects dissatisfaction with unequal gender expectations rather than simply rejecting the family itself. There are other feminist movements such as Me Too, Escape the Corset, and there was another one when I was there. It's called Against Spy Cameras in South Korean institutions known as MOLCA. And earlier, there were many democratic movements run by women as well, and these have similarly challenged the patriarchal norms. Taken together, these movements indicate that many women increasingly refuse traditional expectations regarding gender and reproduction. Next slide. So this slide brings the framework in a holistic manner. As you can see here, structural inequalities generate awareness. awareness develops into agency, and then agency ultimately influences reproductive decisions. Therefore, declining fertility should not simply be understood as an economic outcome. Rather, it reflects conscious responses to structural inequalities. Next slide. While I was in Korea, I also tried to test the spread of critical consciousness, and I tested whether education strengthens critical consciousness. And then I ran this cross tabulation of my survey data, which suggests that graduate women demonstrate higher awareness of gender inequality, stronger support for feminist ideas, and greater confidence in making independent decisions. As you can see, women with masters, they are more confident in independent decision making. They are very active in participating in gender equality initiatives, prioritizing careers, and also taking actions via discussions. However, there is an important finding which emerged during my research there. Highly educated women are not necessarily anti-marriage or anti-family. Many respondents also, through interviews, stated that they would be willing to marry and have children if conditions became more equal or supportive. And can I have the next slide, please? So coming to the belief action gap, I strongly believe that there is a gap in belief and action, what people say and what people do. So as I mentioned earlier, despite having higher access to higher education, many women revealed that they would like to have a family or raise children only if they had supportive husbands or families. So many women do value family life in principles, but under current structural conditions, many choose differently. So the issue is not actually the motherhood itself. It is unequal conditions surrounding motherhood. And for example, a lot of time women get the blame for not having kids. Like the former president Yoon Suk Yeol also used this as a weapon, or the differences between men and women at that time to run his political campaign, and also blame women for the low fertility rates in South Korea. But it again, South Korea's fertility crisis should not be viewed solely through economic and demographic indicators. It is also about changing gender relations. Women are not actually anti-family; they are anti-inequality. And many times, policymakers or stakeholders, they fail to understand that if you just keep on pouring money, it's not going to change much. Rather, you should try to dismantle the double burden or motherhood penalty, or help women in that way only. So, using Paulo Freire's framework, I argue that women's increasing awareness of structural inequality develops into agency and ultimately shapes reproductive decisions. And the contribution of this research is to entirely provide a holistic framework that connects structural conditions and individual awareness and demographic outcomes. Thank you so much. This was it, and I look forward to the questions.
Okay. So thank you. It is, I don't know if there is any discussant, to the best of my knowledge, not. Is that Dornica correct?
Sorry, ma'am?
Is that correct, right?
Yeah,
So
yes, ma'am.
I wanted to raise 2 points and then you can discuss them later.
Sure.
But let me raise. One is that 1997 crisis is not the major factor. I mean, it is a factor at that time, like COVID was also one factor when the violence against women also has increased. Children have increased, but also domestic violence. Throughout, I mean, almost seemed like globally, China, India, of course, was double, South Korea, Japan, France, I mean, whatever the countries you take. So 1980s onwards, the movement has been there. And that is history is very important because it was in 2008 that male headship as a result of the women's movement was abolished in Korea. That was no head of the household, which they said that it was a product of colonialism, and that's why it is not part of the culture, this thing. And there has been 4B movement. I have read that it was 4 escapes. I mean, interpretation is correct, but largely 4 points that you mentioned, this is my second question, is part of the escape corset when these were the things. Maybe English translation is difficult. They say 4 concept was escape the religion, which was Confucianism, escape the corset, which was all these kind of body and thin
Makeup,
bodies,
yeah.
makeup kind of thing, and escape K-pop idols. That's idolizing this kind of K-pop, which was a highly macho, misogynist culture that they were promoting. And last was the kind of thing, the things like body shaming, somebody fat, ugly, and calling women. And they said this is otaku culture. That otaku culture was very prevalent. So that was the 4B movement. I don't know what is the Korean word for 4B, but earlier it was called 4T and then it became 4B. So maybe it expanded. So that is the, in English, 4T became 4B. Now, these are the two questions which you can take up later.
Sure.
Comments. And I would ask now the audience to ask questions, or you, Somu, is there anything in the chat? First, we raise the question. Raise hands and raise the question. Kashmira. Kashmira, please go ahead and raise your question. You have raised the hand. Can you hear me, Kashmira? Somu, can you help?
Maybe she's having some network issues.
Okay. There are two questions in the chat, right? Kashmira is also saying, hello, it is not allowing me to unmute. Can you unmute her?
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, now we can hear you, Kashmira.
Ma'am, this is Kashmira, a budding researcher interested in the Korean politics. So my question follows up on Govind ma'am's question. So Taronika ma'am, as you mentioned, this whole process of decline in fertility rate as a long-term process rather than a single event. Do you think to what extent can this movement serve as a political tool for women to have a stronghold in the decision making, in the state decision making? What is your take on that? Thank you.
Another question, and then we can take two questions each time. Can you read from the chat? I think there are two questions. Somu?
Kashmira asked her question, so there is no more question in the chat box right now.
Okay, it shows two, so that is what. Okay, then can we request the speaker to address this, Tornika,
Sure,
please?
ma'am. Thank you, Shomo, and thank you, ma'am, for the questions. So, ma'am, I also agree with you with the first point that you raised on Asian financial crisis. While I was doing my secondary research in India, this point did not actually arrive with me. But when I went to Korea, I tried to meet a lot of mothers who were expecting, and some of them interestingly pointed that after that crisis, IMF crisis, they call it there, lot of the parents, especially the head of the family, they were under a lot of burden. And at that time, when the companies, they were firing people. So suppose in a family there's a sister and there's a brother, they are both working in some company or in different companies, there were high chances that the sister would be fired, because at that time they as they were trying to cut on salaries, they thought since male or men are the breadwinner of the families, it would be better to let go of the women. They can just take care of the kids and they don't have to worry about it. But at that time, women, they were already sacrificing a lot for the brothers in their family, or for the fathers, or other expectations were there, so they were fired in large amount. It actually stayed with that generation. And that's why a lot of people pointed out that Asian financial crisis gave them that idea, or that such kind of enlightenment to never stop working, because financial independence is very necessary, although it's not a huge part towards declining fertility rate. But I thought it was important to mention, because these kind of crises, they do have very negative kind of impact on women, especially who are working. And I was mentioning about the industrial soldiers. So at that time, they were in dilemma. Following the Confucian lifestyle, they were not really allowed to study, or they were not really allowed to pursue higher education. But on the other hand, when Korea decided to adopt export-oriented growth, especially under the former dictator president Park Chung-hee, they allowed the women of their houses, for example the daughters, to go to these cities, work in the small areas, small factories, and live under highly unstable conditions. For example, these women, since they were short in height, and they were recruited in these light I'm forgetting the name, but light work, or like some kind of like making wigs or clothing or textiles, because men were not doing such kind of work. So they were recruited to make wigs or do some kind of repetitive boring work, but supervised by men. So, and they were regularly harassed by them. They were working for long hours. They were cramped in some small rooms where they were facing some problems. For example, I was reading that while working in factories, women forgot how to stay outside in sunshine. So the factory owners, they will close these windows with newspapers, so that people cannot see inside what's going on, and this will give them really bad eyes, congestion in lungs. So a lot of things happen at that time. But again, and they were praised because they were treated as the industrial soldiers at that time. And interestingly, Park Chung-hee also, although it can be controversial for some people, but he regularized prostitution at that time. For what Korea fights now, the comfort women issue, at that time, the president was actually promoting it so that he could maintain the good relations with US and other business partners. So
Japan in particular.
Japan also, yeah. There were
But
some companies.
comfort women were hired. Why Japan? Not hired. I mean, forcibly taken away.
Kidnapped, taken away,
Yeah.
yes. So these women had to sacrifice a lot since Korean Wars, in Joseon Dynasty, and then when they were finally getting some benefits of education, they were suddenly fired from their companies. And if you go to Korea right now, you can see the repercussions of Asian financial crisis right now. In Gwanghwamun, you will see there are old people, homeless people, they're lying in the in the subway stations. And when I asked, they were all victims of Asian financial crisis because they were not able to pay their debt. And to help their fathers, these women had to give up and find some other jobs where there was no issue. So that's why, ma'am, I tried to bring this point.
It's a major event.
Yeah. And the another one, ma'am, as you interestingly pointed out, 4B. When we read about 4B from outside of Korea, a lot of people think it's a very major issue, or it's a very uh, unique issue, and everyone talks about it. But to my surprise, even I was surprised that even in Korea, not a lot of people, even especially of course, if you go to colleges, universities, they do talk about it, but majority what I saw was they don't really talk about it, and they don't really care about it as long as economically things are fine. And so there are two sides of it. So in universities, especially undergrad students or master students, Korea, there are some universities, especially for women, run by women, for women advocacy and all. They are promoting these kind of stuff. And second is that in Korea, this 4B it's not happening suddenly. They have already things like Sampo generation, and it's not even dividing men and women. So in Sampo generation, the entire generation decided to not have kids, not have any partners, just because they were unemployed or they were not getting any kind of jobs. So this thing is going on for a long time. This 4B took place during this feminism advocacy or some kind of movement that came up after this young Korean woman. She was brutally murdered at Gangnam Station. And at that time, it came into news. Women started talking about their rights, and then Me Too happened. But in like reality, if you want to look for people who are religiously follow 4B, you won't be able to point it out. A lot of people, they are under the radar. However, I met people who are extremely anti-marriage and anti-children, but it's not solely because they don't want to have they hate men. The idea is not to hate men. It's mostly to,
Well, 4B doesn't say hate men.
yeah, it doesn't say, but it's widely misinterpreted, especially in social media. Like, so
yeah.
there's this gender war going on in Korea. They don't want to understand each other's side. So, and coming to the third point on this political decision making, this gender war, actually it was leveraged by a lot of politicians. The PPP, which is usually Conservative Party, they have taken the side of men's right. This was their one of the chief principles for winning the elections. However, the other side, the liberals, they are pro women. And when Yoon Suk Yeol was when there was impeachment happening after the martial law, most of the women, they led those kind of protests against President Yoon. And on the other hand, men, they were leading pro-Yoon protests at that time. So this gender war is there, and politicians, they do take benefit of these kind of gender differences. And talking about to what extent this 4B movement or these kind of feminist movement can affect women's leadership role, I really don't see it right now, because uh, this politics is um, mostly or at major, it's dominated by men. And in Korea, there is a thinking that first you have to be a man to run the politics, because against it's the head of the state, so head has to be a man, coming from those all Confucian teachings. And the second thinking is young people are not very able, or they're not capable of running the family, the country. So although we have President Lee Jae-myung right now, pro women, pro feminism, but still you won't see a lot of women cabinet ministers. I mean, it's
Yeah.
yeah,
Leadership.
there is slow progress, but at leadership levels, it's not much. You will see a lot of women CEOs and all, but if you read this book called Kim Jeong by Cho Namju, Kim Jeong 1982, it's a very nice book, and another book by Haewon Jung, Fire of Flowers. They tell you the reality, like what really happens in Korean companies. Even if you are promoted, most of the times you will be asked to fetch coffee for your supervisors. Some kind of low level jobs, you will be expected to pour drinks. If you are sitting in a setting with a board, you will be the one who will be expected to pour drinks or do some kind of like become an MC. So
Yeah.
these things still take place.
Only two things for your consideration, and then I open the question. One is that when you look at some kind of, there is always a trigger point. Okay.
Yeah.
This generation remembers 1997, but movements have grown from 80s, because abolition of the headship of the household is not a minor thing.
Right,
There is a
right.
legislation, the majority passes this bill, although in practice Confucianism. So rejection of the Confucianism and rejection of the male head has been a very important event. That was we need to look at why in 2008 it happened and not kind of, there was not major this thing 1997. And second is about these historical needs, but this role of social media, whether it is only led by very few generations, but look at what happened in Nepal, what happened here, that all these few young people, they brought the kind of change in the government. And this is the thing, that is the change in the thinking, because massive change is this, not that we interview people. Massive change is low fertility rate, which has impacted economy, which are going to really crash the economic development of Korea. Because if you don't have young people who are going to be the future labor force. So
Right,
this is the scene in terms of the impact, whether they were in large number or a small number, that is what has been the impact. So impact has to be seen. Thank you for this is for your consideration, but very good. You have presented very well. Some question there is, who is that?
Should I read them out?
Yes, please.
We have a question from Dharitri Nursery Chakravarti. She has said, thank you, Torunika, for the interesting presentation. My question is about the sample size and whether this is uniform across the country and different social class.
Do I answer now or do I read?
Is there any other?
Should I read all? There are three
I
questions.
can read. It's fine. I can.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, so for the first one, just wanted to give you a brief background. It was not very easy to gain a lot of survey responses, but I was able to get about 140 because I did my bachelor's from EVA and I had some friends, and so they were able to snowball the survey, and so it got me about 140 responses, and I had to filter it a lot. I tried to focus on the childbearing age, especially the undergrad and masters. Although I did get some questions or the responses from women who are around 50, and interestingly some of them, they answered to my questions, such as they clearly said that even they don't want their daughters to have kids. And this was very shocking to me as well, because in India we have a different set of expectations. In Korea it's different. When I asked, they said we just don't want them to suffer like us. So it's pretty obvious. And I was also able to talk to people just randomly on roads, and I saw mothers being very, very supportive of their daughter's decision not to have kids, or not just like focus solely on careers. And if you are interested in Korean society, there are some dramas like the Gangnam, I'm forgetting the name, but like it just shows how important education is for Koreans.
Sonata Winter also.
Yeah. So these mothers, they solely focus on their kids' education, and they're also supporting the lifestyle choices of their daughters as well. Yeah. So shall I read the next one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Read the question and then.
Thank you for that. Could you please share if you have come across any limitations to applying Paulo Freire's concept of critical consciousness within this analysis? Also, could you please explain if there are methods to empirically measure critical consciousness? Yes, I did face limitations because, as I mentioned first, it's very important to get a big sample size. So initially I was having such kind of limitations, and there was language barriers also. And this critical consciousness was not it was not when I was reading about it, it was not applied for like this kind of scenario, like to understand the process of declining fertility rates. Instead, it was to I think it was to measure the consciousness of Black women who were working in factories. So I had to little bit think about it and then put it in the scenario. My supervisor also, Professor Sandeep Mishra, also helped me during this entire process. So because I was taking the same concept but in different scenarios, there were some limitations like that. And yes, there are empirical methods to do so, and these are very difficult for someone who is purely from humanities, because these are highly they're rich in numbers. But I was able to get some help from my friend who helped me run the cross tabulation using Python. So I had to use the Python software to cross tabulate the information as well. The third one is, apart from incentives, what steps have government taken to remove this double burden? As you explained, the consciousness of women affect fertility was, oh, okay. So what steps?
Read the question so that others can listen.
Okay, apart from incentives, what steps have the government has taken to remove this double burden? As you explained, the consciousness of women affects fertility and the country as whole. So there are some schemes. For example, I was able to talk to people who had twins, and interestingly, if you have twins, you get more benefits. For example, not just rewards or incentives, the monetary, but also, for example, from your entire process of getting pregnant to postpartum, these have the Korea has great postpartum services. So you go there and you do not take care of, you do not worry about anything. You will get food, your baby will be taken care of. But again, it depends on the, like, the first there is some less amount you have to give, and later you have to pay by yourself. And second is, for example, you don't have to pay for parking fee. If you are bringing your kids, you don't have to pay for fees at museum or exhibitions. So these are all kind of rewards to have kids, so that when parents are spending some time with their kids, they don't have to worry about extra costs or extra baggage that comes with kids.
Now, there's
And
a sub question, Tonika, in this. Has policy done anything to share the double burden? This is to
oh
have
yeah,
kids.
so yeah,
There would be more
I
incentives to have kids.
yeah,
Yeah.
for the policy part, I don't think it has become very successful, because I was just coming. Thank you, Professor, for reminding me that.
Uh,
So one of the other benefits that you get from the government is that you can send your kids to these childcare centers. So from, suppose, from 8 to 5. But sometimes what happens is this double burden things get worsened when you have to serve long working hours. So suppose the father is working from 9 to 11 p.m. and the mother is also working from 9 to 11 p.m. The child is left alone at the care center. Or next day, if the mother has to go little early, or the father has to leave later, then there are differences between couples, like who's going to drop the kid, who's going to pick the kid. So even if there are policies for mothers, it doesn't really help, because the other systemic changes are not there. For example, long working hours are, it's one of the main obstacle for women to balance the family and work. I was also interviewing this famous author who wrote about the problems of mother, and she told me that uh, even after such policies, even after getting rewards, she feels very guilty at work. And because she has to leave her child alone in the child care center, because fathers are still not taking the responsibilities. The It's not 50-50, it's either 80-20, 90-10. So as long as people start, the fathers or the families start supporting the mothers, it's going to be a little difficult, even for the
Tanika, you have
policy.
shown very well that how men spend so little time on the housework
Yeah,
and
yeah,
how much women spend.
yeah,
So that
yeah,
is very, that is the, there is hardly any change. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a little bit of change. It
yeah.
used to be 6 minutes or something about 25 years ago. I remember once I was teaching in Asian Institute of Technology, and then from EVA, some women, I professor visited us and gave lecture, and then looked at the data. 6 minutes they were spending only in housework. So that now it is about 17%, or how much is there?
Exactly. No, ma'am, like I remember I was also presenting the same information in Korea, and even women, they don't realize this thing. They asked me two, three times, like, are you sure it's correct data? And then I had to point it out at the Kihasa report. I had to point it to them. But yes, ma'am, as you were mentioning, in Korea, for mothers can take 90 days of maternal leave. Fathers, which is a pretty, now it's getting quite popular. Fathers are also taking paternal leave, but it's only 20 days. So
is it in India?
so just my question is, does a baby need not to know his fatherly love or something like that? But yeah, the problems are still there.
Yeah, that's right. Any other question? Somu, is there any other question? I don't.
We don't have any more
I don't
questions.
think.
Okay. So should we thank the speaker?
Okay, then thank you, Chair. I seek your permission to formally bring an end to today's session.
I wanted to thank and suggest to Tonika that you must publish your work, Tonika. Don't get, a lot of students get tired and they don't look at your thesis for years.
Sure, ma'am. I'm trying to
You
publish.
must
Thank you so
publish
much,
your
ma'am.
work, okay? That is very important, because it is not a simple thing, just a low fertility rate in one country. It is a
Yes.
question of it is expanding
Right.
everywhere, and this raises the whole question of labor force.
Right.
Where do you get the labor force? And
Right.
that is these countries, the miracle societies of East Asia, China, Japan, Korea, they are facing. Korea is the worst, but Japan
Yes,
is
ma'am.
also bad. And China, so they are giving incentives like money, but money is not working. But what
Right.
women want, the shared work, shared responsibility. So some questions are there like this. So, and historical also, see that women's movement have been long, and
Yes,
there
ma'am.
have been successes.
Minjong movement.
In refusing the, I mean, Confucianism is not a state ideology in Korea. It was never there, but people believe in it. So it is
Believe it,
not
yes,
much
ma'am.
like people's ideology. So these are some questions you can consider while publishing the work, and it's a wonderful kind of
Thank you so
presentation.
much, ma'am,
Thank
for
you
your
very
comments and insights.
much. Look forward to meeting you sometime and
Thank you,
discuss.
ma'am.
Yeah, Somu, please, now you close that.
With this, we come to an end of today's seminar. We thank Ms. Torunika Roy and Professor Govind Kelkar for gracing today's seminar with their presence and for giving us their valuable time. We also thank the audience for joining us today. The video of today's seminar shall be available on the ICS YouTube channel. We extend a warm invitation to all for the upcoming Wednesday seminar next week. Details about upcoming events can be found on the ICS website, and you may also subscribe to our newsletter for regular updates. Thank you everyone for joining.